The security guards were already moving to escort the little girl out when she did something that stopped Billionaire CEO Alexander Kane dead in his tracks. What this 8-year-old said next would shatter everything he thought he knew about success, family, and second chances. And when you hear how this story ends, you won't believe what this ruthless businessman was willing to sacrifice for a complete stranger. Alexander Kane adjusted his Italian silk tie as he stepped out of his black Bentley, the morning sun reflecting off the glass towers of Kane Industries headquarters. At 35, he was the youngest CEO in the company's history, having transformed his late father's struggling manufacturing business into a tech empire worth $12 billion. The numbers were what mattered to Alexander. Quarterly profits, market share, efficiency ratings, everything could be measured, optimized, and controlled. People were assets or liabilities, nothing more. It's how he'd built his fortune, and it's how he'd earned his reputation as the most ruthless executive in Silicon Valley. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. His assistant, Margaret, rushed to meet him at the elevator, tablet in hand. "Mr. Kane, the board meeting has been moved to 9:30. The Henderson acquisition paperwork is ready for your signature, and the factory closure in Cleveland?" Alexander cut her off, not looking up from his phone where he was already reviewing stock prices. Margaret hesitated. "Scheduled for next Friday. All 847 employees will be terminated as planned." Alexander nodded curtly. The Cleveland plant had been losing money for 2 years. Sentimentality didn't pay shareholders. Good, what else? As they stepped into the elevator, Margaret cleared her throat. "There's one issue, sir. Some of the terminated employees have been persistent. A few have tried calling corporate, and yesterday someone attempted to schedule a meeting through reception." "Security knows to handle that," Alexander replied coldly. "Anyone who can't accept reality isn't my problem." The elevator doors opened to reveal the pristine marble lobby of the executive floor. Alexander strode toward his corner office, his mind already on the acquisition that would add another billion to his net worth. He had 3 board meetings, 2 conference calls with investors, and a lunch meeting with senators who could expedite his government contracts. Everything was perfectly planned, perfectly controlled, exactly how Alexander liked it. He had spent years building walls around himself after his father's death, learning that emotions were weaknesses and connections were vulnerabilities. The business world had taught him that mercy was expensive and kindness was a luxury he couldn't afford. Every decision was calculated for maximum profit and minimum risk. His personal life was equally sterile. Alexander lived alone in a penthouse apartment overlooking Central Park, ate dinner at his desk more often than not, and hadn't spoken to his remaining family members in 3 years. Relationships required emotional investment he couldn't afford. Every person he'd ever trusted had either betrayed him or left him, starting with his mother, who abandoned the family when the business nearly went bankrupt. The irony wasn't lost on him that he'd saved the company she'd walked away from, only to become exactly the kind of person she'd accused his father of being: cold, distant, and obsessed with success at any cost. Alexander's office occupied the entire corner of the 42nd floor, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a commanding view of the city below. The space was a monument to success, awards lining the walls, original artwork worth more than most people's homes, and a desk made from a single piece of Brazilian rosewood that had cost more than a luxury car. He settled into his leather chair and opened his laptop, already mentally preparing for the Cleveland announcement. The factory closure would save the company $37 million annually. Simple mathematics. The 847 people losing their jobs were unfortunate casualties, but Alexander had learned long ago that sentiment was a luxury successful businesses couldn't afford. Margaret knocked and entered, Sir, there's been another attempt. A man named David Torres called 6 times yesterday requesting a meeting about the Cleveland closure. Security flagged him as persistent, but non-threatening. Alexander didn't look up from his screen. Standard response. No meetings, no exceptions. Yes, sir, however. Margaret hesitated. He mentioned his daughter has been asking to speak with you personally. Apparently, she's been quite insistent. Alexander's fingers paused over the keyboard. His daughter? A child, sir. 8 years old, according to the caller, Mr. Torres said. She's determined to speak with you about giving him another chance. Security wasn't sure how to handle the child's request. For a moment, something flickered across Alexander's face: surprise, maybe even curiosity. Then his expression hardened again. Children don't make business decisions. Tell security to maintain standard protocols. But as Alexander turned back to his computer, he couldn't shake an odd feeling. In his world of corporate warfare and calculated moves, the idea of a child trying to advocate for her father was unexpected. Almost naive. He pushed the thought away. Sentiment was exactly the kind of weakness that destroyed companies and ruined careers. Alexander had learned that lesson the hard way, and he wasn't about to forget it now. What he didn't know was that in exactly 17 minutes, everything he believed about power, success, and what truly mattered was about to be challenged by someone who barely reached his waist. Because sometimes the smallest voices carry the biggest truths. And sometimes the most powerful people are the ones who need saving the most. Alexander was reviewing the quarterly projections when his phone buzzed. Margaret's voice came through the intercom, strained and uncertain. Mr. Kane, I'm sorry to interrupt, but we have a situation in the lobby. Alexander didn't look up from his screen. Handle it. Sir, it's a child. She somehow got past the front desk and is asking to see you specifically. Security is with her, but she's quite determined. Alexander's fingers paused over the keyboard. A child? Yes, sir. She says her name is Sofia Torres. She's asking for just 5 minutes to talk about her father. Torres. Alexander remembered the name from Margaret's earlier briefing. David Torres. One of the Cleveland employees who'd been persistently calling. Now his daughter was here. Alexander's jaw tightened. Using a child to gain sympathy was a new low, even for desperate employees. Send security to escort her out immediately, Alexander said curtly. Sir, she's not leaving. She says she... Wait all day if necessary. The lobby is getting crowded with morning meetings, and she's drawing attention. Alexander cursed under his breath. The last thing he needed was a scene in his corporate headquarters. Bad optics could affect stock prices, and he had investors coming in later. Fine, he snapped. Bring her up. 5 minutes. Then she's gone. 3 minutes later, Margaret opened Alexander's office door. Behind her stood a small girl with dark curly hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. She wore a faded pink dress that had been carefully mended at the sleeve and shoes that were scuffed but polished. Despite her modest appearance, she walked into the intimidating office with the confidence of someone on a mission. Alexander barely glanced up from his computer. You have 5 minutes. Say whatever you came to say. Sofia Torres stepped forward, her small hands clasped in front of her. Mr. Kane, my name is Sofia Torres. My daddy works at your factory in Cleveland. Worked, Alexander corrected coldly, still not looking at her. Past tense, the facility is closing. Sofia's voice remained steady. That's why I'm here. I want to ask you to please give my daddy another chance. Alexander finally looked up, his expression impatient. Young lady, business decisions aren't made based on personal requests. Your father's employment is terminated. That's final. But Sofia didn't flinch. Instead, she took another step closer to his massive desk, her brown eyes meeting his directly. My daddy has been working at your factory for 12 years. He's never missed a day except when I was born and when Mama got really sick. Something in her voice made Alexander pause. There was no whining, no tears, just a quiet determination that seemed far too mature for an 8-year-old. He knows every machine in that place, Sophia continued. He can fix things other people can't. When the big mixer broke last year and they said it would cost a lot of money to replace, Daddy figured out how to fix it for almost nothing. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Alexander leaned back in his chair, studying the small girl. Even if that's true, one person can't justify keeping an entire factory open. Sophia nodded seriously. I know, but Daddy says there are lots of good people who work there. People with families like us. Mrs. Rodriguez has twin babies. Mr. Johnson takes care of his elderly mama. And Sarah Chun is saving money for college. Business isn't about individual stories, Alexander said, his voice growing colder. It's about numbers. The Cleveland plant loses money. Closing it saves the company millions. Sophia was quiet for a moment, then said something that stopped Alexander's breath. My mama used to say that money is just paper, but people are real. And when you help real people, you become real too. Alexander's jaw clenched. Where is your mother now? Sophia's voice grew softer. She's in heaven. She got sick 2 years ago. The doctors tried really hard, but her body was too tired to keep fighting. For the first time since Sophia had entered his office, Alexander felt something crack in his chest. He pushed the feeling away. I'm sorry for your loss, but personal tragedies don't change business realities. Sophia stepped even closer to his desk, her small hands reaching up to place something on the polished surface. It was a drawing, made with colored pencils on simple notebook paper. The image showed a man in work clothes standing next to a large machine, and beside him, a small girl holding his hand. At the top, in careful 8-year-old handwriting, it read, My hero daddy. This is my daddy at work, Sophia said quietly. He loves his job because he says he's helping build things that make people's lives better. He comes home tired but happy because he knows he did something important. Alexander stared at the drawing, something stirring uncomfortably in his chest. Your father can find another job. Sophia shook her head. He's been trying, but all the other factories are cutting jobs too. And Daddy, he's been getting really sick. Alexander's head snapped up. Sick? Sophia's composure finally wavered slightly. He tries to hide it, but I see him taking medicine when he thinks I'm not looking. And sometimes at night, I hear him crying in his room. He's scared we're going to lose our house, and he's scared about being sick and not being able to take care of me. The words hit Alexander like a physical blow. Here was this child, clearly frightened and worried, yet standing in his office with more courage than most of his board members ever showed. Please. Mr. Kane, Sophia said, her voice breaking just slightly. I'm not asking you to keep the factory open just for us. I'm asking you to give people like my daddy a chance to show you what they can do. Maybe there's a way to make it work that you haven't thought of yet. Alexander stood up slowly, walking to his window to avoid looking at the hope in Sophia's eyes. In all his years of corporate negotiations, no one had ever challenged him quite like this 8-year-old girl. Your 5 minutes are up, he said quietly, his back still turned. Sophia picked up her drawing and nodded. Thank you for listening to me, Mr. Kane. I hope you change your mind. As she walked toward the door, Alexander found himself calling out. Wait! Sophia turned back, hope lighting up her face. Alexander stared at her for a long moment, his carefully controlled world suddenly feeling very uncertain. What's your father's full name? David Miguel Torres, Sophia said immediately. He's employee number 4731. He works in Section C, maintaining the hydraulic systems. Alexander nodded curtly. Review his file. Sophia's face broke into the first smile Alexander had seen from her. Thank you, Mr. Kane. Thank you so much. After she left, Alexander stood alone in his office, staring at the empty space where the small girl had stood. For the first time in 15 years, he questioned whether being right was worth being heartless. And somewhere deep in his chest, a feeling he'd buried long ago began to stir back to life. Alexander couldn't concentrate for the rest of the morning. During his board meeting, he found himself thinking about Sophia's steady brown eyes. During his conference call with investors, he kept hearing her words, "When you help real people, you become real too." By lunch, his curiosity had overtaken his annoyance. Alexander called his head of security. "I want a complete background check on David Miguel Torres, employee 4731 at the Cleveland facility. Everything: employment history, education, references, personal circumstances. I want it on my desk by end of business." "Is there a security concern, sir?" Alexander hesitated. "Just do it." 3 hours later, the file landed on Alexander's desk. What he read made him sit back in his chair, stunned. David Torres wasn't just a factory worker. He held a master's degree in industrial engineering from MIT, the same program Alexander had completed years earlier. His academic records were exceptional. Top 5% of his class, specialized in efficiency optimization and system design. His thesis had been on revolutionary approaches to manufacturing cost reduction through innovative process design. But the real shock came in his employment history. David had worked for 3 major corporations as a senior systems engineer, with documented savings of over $40 million through his process improvements. His supervisors consistently rated him as exceptional and indispensable. Then, 8 years ago, everything changed. Alexander found the medical records. David's wife, Maria, had been diagnosed with aggressive breast cancer. The treatments weren't covered by insurance. David had drained his savings, sold their home, and eventually left his high-paying engineering position to take the factory job in Cleveland, the only place that offered immediate employment with health benefits. When Maria needed them most, the medical bills were staggering. Even with insurance, the experimental treatments had cost over $300,000. David had mortgaged everything, borrowed against his retirement, and taken the factory position, not because he couldn't do better work, but because he needed the stability and benefits while caring for his dying wife. Alexander's throat tightened as he read further. David had continued working at the factory even after Maria's death, staying because Sophia needed stability and because, according to his supervisor's notes, he'd become the unofficial problem solver for the entire facility. A note from the Cleveland plant manager caught Alexander's attention. "Torres has revolutionized our maintenance protocols. Equipment downtime reduced by 40% since he implemented his systems. Suggests cost-saving measures monthly, most of which we've adopted. Plant efficiency has improved 23% in the 2 years since he began contributing beyond his job description. We'd be lost without him." Alexander reached for his phone and called the Cleveland facility directly. "This is Alexander Kane. Put me through to plant manager Roberts immediately." Roberts' voice was nervous when he came on the line. "Mr. Kane, I wasn't expecting. Is this about the closure, sir?" "Tell me about David Torres." A pause. "Torres? Well, he's probably our most valuable employee, sir. Is there a problem?" "What do you mean by valuable?" "He single-handedly solved problems that should have required expensive consultants. Last month, he redesigned our quality control process and eliminated 90% of our defect rate. The month before that, he figured out how to reduce our energy costs by 15%, with some adjustments to the machinery timing." Alexander gripped the phone tighter. "Why wasn't this in any reports?" "Well, sir, Torres never asked for recognition. He just does the work." And honestly, we weren't sure upper management would care about innovations from a floor-level employee. Alexander's jaw clenched. Send me everything. Every suggestion, every improvement, every cost-saving measure Torres has implemented. I want it all. Yes, sir, but may I ask why? Alexander hung up without answering. An hour later, Alexander's email was flooded with documentation that painted a picture of systematic negligence by his own company. David Torres had been submitting detailed proposals for facility improvements for 3 years. Each proposal was professionally written, backed by data, and projected significant cost savings. Every single one had been ignored by middle management. One proposal alone for restructuring the production line workflow projected annual savings of $12 million. Another, for updating the machinery maintenance schedule based on predictive analytics, could have prevented the costly breakdowns that had been plaguing the facility. Alexander ran the numbers. If even half of David's suggestions had been implemented, the Cleveland plant wouldn't just be profitable, it would be one of their most successful facilities. His hands shook as he reached for his phone. This time, he called David Torres directly. Hello? The voice was tired, cautious. Mr. Torres, this is Alexander Kane. Silence. Then, Mr. Kane, is this about Sophia? I'm so sorry she bothered you. I had no idea she went to your office. I would never have, Mr. Torres. Alexander interrupted. I've been reviewing your file. Another pause. I see. Why didn't you tell anyone about your background? Your education, your experience? David's laugh was bitter. Would it have mattered? I applied for engineering positions when I first started at the plant. I was told they had all the engineers they needed, but they could use someone in maintenance. I needed the job and the insurance, so I took it. Your proposals, the ones you've been submitting, they're brilliant. They're also ignored, David said quietly. I stopped expecting responses years ago. I submit them because I care about the work, even if no one else does. Alexander felt something cold settle in his stomach. Why didn't you push harder? Demand meetings? Go over your supervisor's head? David was quiet for a long moment. Mr. Kane, with all due respect, I'm a factory worker with a sick child and mounting medical bills. Men like me don't demand meetings with executives. We're grateful for the jobs we have and we don't rock the boat. The simple truth of it hit Alexander like a punch. David Torres was everything Alexander claimed to value: intelligence, innovation, results. But because he'd been labeled as a factory worker, no one had bothered to listen. Mr. Torres, I want to offer you a position. Senior engineering consultant. You'd work directly with our efficiency team to implement your ideas across all our facilities. Silence stretched so long Alexander wondered if the call had dropped. Mr. Kane, David finally said, his voice strained. I appreciate the gesture, but I can't accept charity. This isn't charity, this is business. Your proposals could save us millions. My proposals have been available for 3 years, David replied. If they were truly valuable, someone would have noticed before my daughter embarrassed you in your office. Alexander flinched. That's not. I won't be your guilt project, Mr. Kane. Sophia and I will be fine. We always find a way. The line went dead. Alexander stared at the phone, stunned. He'd just offered a man a career-changing opportunity, and David Torres had hung up on him. For the first time in his professional life, Alexander Kane didn't know what to do next. He'd found exactly what he claimed to value: talent, innovation, results, and the man had refused his help. As he sat alone in his corner office, surrounded by the symbols of his success, Alexander realized he might have discovered something more valuable than any business proposal, a man with more integrity than he'd ever possessed, and he had no idea how to win back something he'd never thought to value before: respect. Alexander Kane had built his empire by never taking no for an answer, but David Torres' rejection haunted him for 3 days. He found himself staring out his office window, thinking about a man who chose dignity over opportunity and a little girl who believed her father was a hero. On Thursday morning, Alexander made a decision that shocked his entire executive team. Cancel the Cleveland closure, he announced during the emergency board meeting he'd called. The room erupted in protests. Alexander, the plant loses money, his CFO argued. The shareholders expect the plant loses money because we've been ignoring solutions for 3 years. Alexander cut him off. He projected David's proposals onto the conference room screen. David Torres has submitted 17 detailed improvement plans. If we implemented just 5 of them, Cleveland would be profitable. Board member Patricia Wells frowned. Who is David Torres? A maintenance worker with an MIT engineering degree who's been trying to save us millions while we've been planning to fire him. The silence in the room was deafening. Alexander continued, I'm not just canceling the closure. I'm implementing Torres' recommendations across all facilities. And I'm going to Cleveland personally to oversee the transition. His assistant Margaret nearly dropped her tablet. In 15 years, Alexander had never visited a factory floor. The next morning, Alexander walked into the Cleveland plant wearing jeans and a company polo shirt instead of his usual $1,000 suits. The workers stared in shock as the Billionaire CEO asked to be taken to David Torres. He found David in Section C, elbow deep in a hydraulic system, his hands covered in grease. When David looked up and saw Alexander, his expression was carefully neutral. Mr. Kane, Mr. Torres, I've come to apologize. David straightened slowly, wiping his hands on a rag. Around them, other workers had stopped to listen. Apologize for what? For wasting 3 years of brilliant ideas. For letting middle management ignore solutions that could have saved jobs. For being so disconnected from my own company that I almost fired the most valuable employee we have. David's eyebrows rose. I don't understand. Alexander pulled out his tablet, showing David the implementation timeline. Your efficiency proposals are being fast-tracked. Corporate has approved a $12 million renovation based on your designs. You're being promoted to Chief Innovation Officer for all Kane Industries facilities, reporting directly to me. Mr. Kane, I told you. This isn't charity, Alexander interrupted. This is me trying to fix the stupidest mistake my company has ever made. Your starting salary is $380,000, plus benefits, plus a performance bonus based on the savings you generate. David stared at the numbers, his face pale. Around them, the other workers began to murmur excitedly. There's one condition, Alexander continued. Sophia gets a full college scholarship fund, starting now. And your medical insurance covers everything, including any ongoing treatments you might need. For the first time since Alexander had met him, David Torres' composure cracked. His eyes filled with tears he quickly tried to hide. Why? David whispered. Alexander thought of Sophia's drawing, still sitting on his desk. Because your daughter taught me what I forgot that people aren't. Just numbers. And because I want to be worthy of the faith an 8-year-old had in a complete stranger. The next 3 months transformed not just the Cleveland plant, but Alexander himself. He spent 2 days a week on factory floors, learning systems, listening to workers, implementing changes. David's innovations were revolutionary. Efficiency improved 35%, costs dropped 28%, and worker satisfaction soared. But more than the business success, Alexander found himself changing in ways he hadn't expected. He started eating lunch with employees instead of alone in his office. He learned workers' names, asked about their families, celebrated their successes. Sophia visited the plant regularly, always bringing drawings for Alexander's office and updates on her improved grades. Watching David work alongside his daughter, Alexander began to understand what he'd been missing, the connection between purpose and people. One evening, As they reviewed productivity reports, David said quietly, "You know, Sophia talks about you at dinner every night." Alexander looked up, surprised. "She does?" "She says you're different now. That you smile with your eyes, not just your mouth." David paused. "She's not wrong. Whatever Sophia said to you that first day, it changed something." Alexander felt warmth spread through his chest. "She told me that helping real people makes you real too. I'm still figuring out what that means." David smiled. "You're learning. That's what matters." For the first time in 15 years, Alexander felt like he was exactly where he belonged. The Torres family had given him something he'd never known he was missing, a sense of home. Then everything fell apart. It started with a phone call on a Tuesday morning. David had collapsed at work and was rushed to the emergency room. Alexander arrived at the hospital to find Sophia in the waiting room, tears streaming down her face. "The doctors say Daddy's really sick," she whispered as Alexander knelt beside her. "They're doing tests, but they think it might be the same thing that took Mama." Alexander's heart stopped. Cancer. David had been hiding his illness for months, working through pain and exhaustion while transforming the company. The diagnosis confirmed Sophia's fears. Advanced pancreatic cancer, the same aggressive type that had taken Maria. The doctors were blunt with treatment. David might have 6 months. Without it, maybe 6 weeks. But the experimental treatments weren't covered by insurance, and they cost $500,000. "I'll pay for everything," Alexander told David immediately. David shook his head weakly from his hospital bed. "I won't take your charity, Alexander. I've never taken handouts, and I won't start now. This isn't charity. You've saved the company millions, and you've paid me well for it," David replied. "But I won't burden you with my problems, Sophia, and I will figure something out." Over the next week, David's condition worsened rapidly. He was too sick to work, too proud to accept help, and too stubborn to let Alexander pay for treatment. Sophia spent every day after school at the hospital, reading to her father and pretending everything would be okay. Alexander watched helplessly as the man who had taught him about integrity chose dignity over survival. Every offer of help was politely but firmly refused. David Torres would rather die than accept what he saw as pity. The cruel irony wasn't lost on Alexander. He'd finally learned to value people over profits. But the person who'd taught him that lesson was slipping away, and there was nothing his billions could do to save him. As he stood outside David's hospital room, watching Sophia hold her father's hand while he slept, Alexander realized he was about to lose the 2 people who had given his life meaning. And for the first time since childhood, the powerful billionaire felt completely, utterly powerless. Alexander spent 3 sleepless nights pacing his penthouse, desperately searching for a solution. David was deteriorating rapidly, and Sophia's brave facade was cracking. Every offer of financial help had been refused. Every attempt to pay the hospital bills blocked by David's stubborn pride. Then Alexander remembered something Sophia had said months ago. When you help real people, you become real too. He wasn't helping David the right way. He was trying to solve the problem with money, the old Alexander's approach. But David Torres didn't need charity. He needed opportunity. On Thursday morning, Alexander walked into David's hospital room with a briefcase and a contract. "I have a proposition," Alexander announced, pulling up a chair beside David's bed. David looked exhausted, his face gaunt from the aggressive cancer. "Alexander, I told you, this isn't charity," Alexander interrupted. "This is business. Kane Industries is launching a new division, Advanced Manufacturing Solutions. We need someone to head the research and development department." David frowned. "I'm dying, Alexander." "Maybe, but while you're fighting you could be working, from here, from home, wherever you need to be." Alexander opened the briefcase, revealing detailed plans. Remote consultation, flexible schedule, full medical coverage as part of the executive package. Starting salary, $2.2 million annually. Sophia, who had been quietly coloring in the corner, looked up with wide eyes. David stared at the contract. $2 million? Your efficiency innovations have saved us $47 million in 6 months. This salary reflects your actual value to the company. Alexander leaned forward. The medical coverage includes experimental treatments, clinical trials, anything you need. Not as charity, but as healthcare benefits for our head of R&D. 4. The first time, David hesitated. The treatments might not work. Then you'll have spent your remaining time doing work you love while giving Sophia financial security for life. If they do work, Alexander's voice grew hopeful. Then Kane Industries keeps its most valuable innovator. David looked at Sophia, who had stopped coloring and was watching him with desperate hope in her eyes. "Daddy," she whispered, "please try." David signed the contract with shaking hands. Within hours, Alexander had a team of specialists flying in from across the country. The experimental treatment began immediately, funded through David's executive health benefits. The first month was brutal. David was too sick to work, spending most days sleeping while Sophia did homework beside his hospital bed. Alexander visited daily, bringing work reports that David was too weak to review and drawings from Sophia that covered every surface in the room. Then something remarkable happened. The experimental treatment began working. David's energy returned gradually, and with it, his passion for innovation. He started consulting from his hospital bed, designing improvements for facilities across the country. But the real miracle happened on a Tuesday afternoon. Alexander was reviewing quarterly reports with David when Sophia burst into the room, waving a paper. "Daddy, Daddy, I got an A+ on my science project about engineering." David's face lit up as Sophia climbed carefully onto his hospital bed. "Tell me about it, sweetheart. I explained how you fixed the big machine at the factory and saved the company millions of dollars. Mrs. Peterson said I should be proud to have such a smart daddy." As Alexander watched father and daughter together, Sophia animated and happy. David weak but smiling. He felt something he'd never experienced before. Pure, uncomplicated joy that had nothing to do with profit margins or stock prices. 6 months. Later, David Torres walked back into the Cleveland plant, not as a maintenance worker, but as executive vice president of innovation. The experimental treatment had worked. He was in remission, and the doctors were cautiously optimistic. But the real transformation was in Alexander himself. The cold, calculating billionaire who had once seen people as numbers had become someone who remembered workers' birthdays, attended their children's graduations, and made decisions based on human impact as much as financial return. One evening, as they reviewed the year's remarkable results, productivity up 60%, employee satisfaction at record highs, profits exceeding all projections, David looked at Alexander thoughtfully. "You know, Sophia was right about you," Alexander smiled. "What did she say this time?" "That you're not just her daddy's boss anymore. You're family." Alexander felt his throat tighten. "Is that what she said?" David nodded. "She wants to know if you'll come to her birthday party next week. She's turning 9, and she says it wouldn't be the same without her Uncle Alexander." For a moment, Alexander couldn't speak. Uncle Alexander. This brilliant, brave little girl considered him family. "I wouldn't miss it for the world," he finally managed. Sophia's birthday party was held in the community center, surrounded by friends from school and colleagues from the plant. Alexander sat beside David, watching Sophia blow out her candles, and realized this was what success actually looked like, not the size of your bank account, but the number of people who mattered to you. When Sophia opened her gifts, she saved Alexander's for last. Inside the simple box was a small framed photo. The 3 of them at the plant, Sophia wearing a tiny hard hat, David explaining a machine, and Alexander listening intently. It's us, Sophia said, beaming. We're a team. Alexander knelt down to her level, the best team I've ever been part of. As the party continued around them, David pulled Alexander aside. I never thanked you properly. For what? For seeing Sophia's worth that first day. For seeing mine when no one else would. For becoming the man she believed you could be. Alexander shook his head. I should be thanking you. You and Sophia saved me from a life I didn't even realize was empty. They watched Sophia laugh with her friends, healthy and happy and secure in the knowledge that the two most important men in her life would always be there for her. Alexander Kane had started the year as a billionaire who had everything money could buy, but nothing that money couldn't replace. He was ending it as something far more valuable, a man who had learned that the greatest wealth isn't measured in dollars, but in the people who choose to love you. And it all began because a brave 8-year-old girl believed that even the coldest heart could learn to feel again. Sometimes the smallest voices really do carry the biggest truths. And sometimes, asking for a second chance is exactly how you discover what you were meant to become. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.